Okay, I think we're live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 3 now of the Algorithmic Pattern Salon. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, and hope you've been enjoying this as much as I have. There's been some really amazing talks so far. For the eagle-eyed among us, I am not Alex. Alex was meant to be chairing the session today, but unfortunately is not feeling so well today, so we're hoping Alex gets better soon. Today I will be joined with some invited talks from the alpaca residents, from Geraldine Jones, Charlotte Megroureche, and Anuradha Reddy. For those who don't know me yet, my name is Lizzie Wilson. I am a lecturer in creative computing at the Creative Computing Institute at University of the Arts London. And I'm kind of an interdisciplinary artist and researcher, interested in live coding, live computer music, musical pattern, and things like epistemologies of artificial intelligence and human-machine collaboration. So very excited to be here today to talk with our residents. First up, we have Geraldine, who's going to be presenting the work of Geraldine and Charlotte. So if you'd like to introduce yourself, Geraldine, to our audience, and then take it away with your presentation. So,
okay, hello. I'm Geraldine Jones. I'm a basket maker, and I've been working with basketry and mathematics for the last 3 years with a group called Forces in Translation, which has been very interesting and introduced me to lots of things I'd never even thought about before. So the one of them that's really interested me has been the Fibonacci theorem and the Fibonacci sequence. And this is what I'm working with. This is what the slideshow is going to be about. It is only one aspect of what I've been doing, but here we go. So it's why I'm going to be doing the Then Try This residency. I'll be exploring some of the pathways which determine the Fibonacci sequences simply by using pattern and guidelines without any calculations involved, as a plant would, or a seashell growing its shell around itself. So I've worked for a basket maker for 40 years now, and I'll be using the basketry technique known as cycloid weave. It's a looping technique, and it represents incremental cellular growth. So let's go on and see the Fibonacci coming up. Okay, this is it's the cycloid weaving coming up first. This is how it's done, where it's from, Borneo. It's still, this is still a used technique in Borneo and surrounding places. But my work has been mainly with stainless. Whoops. Gone on to the next slide. It's gone with stainless steel wire rope. This is actually shower curtain, a shower tube rope, which shows the pattern better of the cycloid weave. Right, my advanced button seems to have gone. Slide 3. Slide 4, you've seen that. Okay, so here's a stainless steel wire woven piece showing how some insert loops are arranged. So I begin with a hoop, weave around 8 loops here. The second row, 1 will go below 1, 2 will go below 2, and in between, in the lag of the weave, you put your increased loop. So this weaving is all about increasing loops in different places and making patterns with these increased loops. Here, slide, please. Can you play the slide? So this was a flat piece. Where's it gone to? This was a flat piece of weaving with curved edges, which it actually made itself. I was just playing around with ideas. It was an open-sided tubular structure, and it twisted around itself. And from that point, that's where I found that I was very interested in Fibonacci, because of the Fibonacci shell idea, the increases. And I thought maybe if I were to use the Fibonacci sequence, I would come up with an approximation of a real shell, which would begin from the beginning and carry on as it grew. So this is a sort of Fibonacci rabbits diagram, really. The small one becomes a large one. The large one, it goes on. Oh, I'm going to have to go and switch my phone off, sorry. Oh. Sorry. Oh. Right. The Fibonacci becomes a large one. It then, once it's become a large one, it has an increase. It gets a small one. So from the small to the large to the large again, to the large again, but it has a small one, an increased one. It continues in this way and in this pattern. So this is going from 1 to 3. You know the Fibonacci numbers being 1, 1, 2, 3, 5. So there are 5 loops here. There are 3 loops here. There are 2 loops here. And this is taking it on one stage further to 8 loops. So you've got the 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. So you've got 8 loops over 5 rows. And this, when you weave it, this is what happens. It's a huge increase, which makes it wiggle around a lot. So that wasn't quite what I wanted. I wanted a stretched form of it, because I couldn't make a seashell out of that last increase. So I've developed a system of going from 3 loops to 5 loops, not in just one, just in the following row, but adding a row in between and putting the increased loops in the right places, but only adding 1 on each row. So it's stretched slowly. And initially I was using tables to calculate everything, because I hadn't worked out patterns or anything. I just knew I was doing Fibonacci and using the numbers. So this is a table that I had to create every time I got to a Fibonacci row. Say this number, here's the Fibonacci row of 8. I knew from following the first ones down that the second one in the 8th row would be there, the 5th one would be there. I mean, these would be the increased loops. So in order to know what came in row 9, I would mark down the row 8, and then it would go 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 is a big one. It has 5. 6 is a big one. It has 7. Small, big one. 8, 9, 10 is a little one. So that sort of sequence continued, and this was the result. It was getting more difficult, though, because the further down you would go, 13 to 21, the more times you'd have to calculate and the more times you'd have to count. So in order to do, say, the row 11, I would see which one I would count all the way along before I got to where I would put the increased loop. Anyway, that was the result. I then found that actually you could use guidelines and threads. And I also realized that this 2, 5, 7, 10, 13, 15, 18 was a recurring theme, a recurring sequence on a Fibonacci row. So there were different rules. There were rules to move on, but basically every Fibonacci row here has one guideline through it at numbers 2, 5, 7, and so on. This is a very straightforward increase of one loop below, one increase being put in below each increased loop, which makes just a straight curve. So there's nothing complicated with that. You can see that as you go along. You don't need any calculations, but it's certainly very different in shape. Even though there's only one being added on each row in this one, you can see how very different it is to the one being added in a Fibonacci sequence on that one. This is a piece I'm working on at the moment, which the guidelines again follow the 2, 5, 7, 10, but it's all done by pattern. I don't actually calculate 2, 5, and 7 and 10. I can check the work by going round on a Fibonacci row and reading that the guidelines are coming down at those numbers, and work out where the new loops are inserted. It's actually called the Three Kings sequence because it has a story, and it's basically that in the row of 8 there are 3 kings. They come in at 2, 5, and 7 on those loops. The next row down, the next row down before a Fibonacci row occurs every second row on this. So you've got the Fibonacci row of 8 with the 3 kings. In the next row down, the 3 kings lay their gifts down beside them and an extra loop is inserted. In the next row, which is a Fibonacci row, the 3 kings pick up their gifts, move in with them, sit on the same seat as them. That's an increased loop. And then allowing space for new ones to come in. So this sort of shows the space that Fibonacci creates, and it shows the pattern of it. So here is a king. The red one here is a king with his gift beside him. And the next one goes along, and here is a king with his gift beside him. Now, this king moves in with his gift on the next row down, which is a Fibonacci row, and sits there with his gift. So therefore, it's made an empty seat. Now, because this is another mathematical rule that seems to have be part of the sequence, because there are between this king and this king, because there are more than you move along to the new king comes in, this little blue one, he comes in, he moves along past that king, he moves along 2, and he says, there's a space, because there's still another seat between himself and the next king. So the next blue blob comes in, blue king, whatever follower comes in. He moves all the way along past this one, past this one. This is the looping that's being made. And he goes past this one. In between this king and that king, there are only 2 spaces. So he doesn't actually go in anywhere there. He leaves them. It's only when there are larger stretches than 2 that he can fit in. And that's basically what all the Fibonacci thing is. It's just what I'm trying to do really is understanding how to use the patterning that can evolve to make these increases and decreases, and use and I wonder if this sequence can be incorporated into algorithms to develop Fibonacci patterns. This is a video of a piece of weaving. Can you do the video, please? Just to show. This isn't a Fibonacci one, but this is what I want to translate into a Fibonacci piece of work, and I'm hoping that algorithms and the use of them might help me with that. Okay, so this is the same piece of work when it's flat, and so that's the only reference I've ever. It's a mathematical notation showing how to arrive at this sequence that I found on the internet, which is quite interesting. It just tells you how to get there to these numbers. But what I find, well, I think Charlotte's going to say a few words now about what she finds interesting about it, because she's the mathematician, I'm just the basket maker. Is that right, Charlotte?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Charlotte Megroureche. I was a mathematics teacher, and now I do research in mathematics education. And through my research, I'm interested in connections and continuities between maths and craft. And through that, particularly interested in trying to think mathematics differently to generate some innovation, to open up the field. So one of my central interests in relation to the pieces created by Geraldine was to think about what we can learn mathematically with them, or through them, with looping. And yeah, meeting Geraldine and being involved in the looping practice was very significant for me in those reflections. And around those pieces that she created, I was interested in how Geraldine, with her looping technique and her sensibility for metal wire and for loops, how she was able to generate a new way of thinking about the Fibonacci number sequence. The Fibonacci number sequence is probably one of the most stated example of, to say that mathematics is everywhere, in the growth of shells and the growth of plants. And I think, this openness that Geraldine had to think of, how would a plant or a shell grow that Fibonacci? Obviously, it's not counting in the traditional sense of counting, this traditional 1 + 1 = 2, 1 + 2, 3, adding the 2 last members of the sequence to generate the next one. Obviously, there are other ways of thinking about that Fibonacci number sequence. So I found particularly fascinating this technique and this kind of algorithm that Geraldine devised with the looping and with the sensibility for the types of loops the increased loops and the full loop, and how with those sensibilities she can generate that Fibonacci sequence in terms with the looping and also in terms of loops, and also to see the beautiful structures and curvatures it generates. So I think as a mathematics educator, for me, this type of investigation illuminated the potential for mathematical engagement with a craft technique like looping, and also to rediscover this kind of well-known mathematical object, the Fibonacci number sequence. For me, it added a layer of complexity, and I was fascinated by that, and I'm still fascinated by that, and I'm looking forward to being even more fascinated by that very soon. So yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Great, thank you so much. That was an amazing talk, really, really insightful, and really looking forward to hearing some questions from the audience. So please add these to the chat if you think of anything that you'd like to ask Geraldine and Charlotte. Next up, we should have Anna Reddy. So if you're ready for that, we will add you to the stage.
Yes. Thank you so much. That was a fascinating talk, and I hope that I can build on that in some way with my talk. So let's, thank you. All right. So a little bit of introduction to myself for someone who hasn't seen me already. I am Anuradha Reddy, and I am based in Sweden. I live in Malmö, and I have a background as a researcher. And I have a pattern making practice, as you'll see soon. But I also, I work with different types of materials. I work with textiles and fabrics, and I also draw quite a bit. And another thing that's important for this talk to know about me is that I was born and raised in India, which is relevant to this work. So my talk is called Kambi Kolam as an algorithmic pattern. So what are columns? So kolam is essentially a heritage folk art from South India, and particularly kolam is an art from Tamil Nadu, but there are there are many variations of this pattern. And they go by different names, like Mugu, which is a term same as kolam, but it's in my mother tongue Telugu. And it's also called Rangoli in the north, but then they are still same, but they have lots of variations. For this particular talk, I'll focus exclusively on kolams, which is from Tamil Nadu, the Tamil speaking region of India. And one of the things to know about kolams is that this is like a heritage tradition, goes down millennia of years, and it's continuously evolving. There are new inventions around kolams almost every day in terms of new ways, techniques of drawing, and they're all connected to religion and ritual and aesthetics. So these patterns tend to have cyclical, symmetrical, and geometric components, and they are said to invoke good luck and auspiciousness. Kolams are often drawn in front of a gate or a household in South India, and they act as threshold devices. So they separate inside from the outside, public from private, and also home from the world. And kolams wash away naturally by wind or rain because they're made using chalk powder or rice powder. And a fresh one is drawn every morning. As you can see here, there's a picture of two women drawing a kolam on the street. And who makes kolams? So traditionally, it's mostly Tamil women who make kolams, and every Tamil family generation, every new woman in a family gets to know kolams, secret kolams kept in books and from their mothers and grandmothers. And I remember my own grandmother when I would visit them in the summer in Chennai. She would wake up very, very early in the morning before sunrise and try not to wake us up. And she would go outside the door to do her column. And it's part by memory, part by improvisation. She would, make extremely complex columns, very mathematical, but just like Geraldine, it's a pattern that was kind of embodied. She didn't use maths, she didn't use any formula for it, but it was just something she could intuitively do. And my mom, for example, and her sisters and my cousins, they also are very skilled at columns, but they required, for example, these are some column magazines. They collected these magazines, they kept practice notebooks. So it's a whole kind of environment that column creates within South India, within families. Yes, and to the right is an example of something that I found really pretty in one of these magazines. So particularly, I'm interested in something called Kambi Kolams. So growing up, actually, I didn't really, wasn't so much interested in columns because it carried a lot of religious and gendered baggage that I wasn't comfortable performing. But as I grew older and I got some distance, I started appreciating columns again, but from a more algorithmic or computational perspectives. So Kambi Kolams are really exciting because they are drawn in a single continuous line. They're going around each dot once and only once, and you can observe that here. And the line loops back to where it initially begins. If you're a mathematician, you probably can also call these Euler paths or Euler circuits. So here's, for example, 3 different types of column structures, dot structures, and all the variations. Not all, these are only a few of the variations, but some number of variations of each of these columns. And these columns can be very simple, like the ones that you're seeing right now, but they can also be quite complex. They have varying symmetrical properties and fractal properties. So let's go ahead and look at the computational perspective of column, right? So 2 computer scientist scholars, Gift and Rani Ceremony, they demonstrated how Kambi Kolams can be represented in different ways. So for example, in graph theory form, like Euler circuits, or you can have it like turtle-like chain commands, as you can see here. For example, you go forward and then you go right, and you can create like a necklace kind of symbol structure or turtle chain commands. Or you can also have like the whole thing defined by string grammars, which you can see is like and you can't really tell with the image, but they do have some grammars that they've written down there to represent the different sequence of growing columns on the image to the right. So for Rani and Gift Ceremony, for them, a pattern is said to consist of smaller components concatenated together, and the grammar rules aid in the generation of these picture languages. So for them, columns are picture languages. And let's see another kind of perspective of columns. So unlike the ceremonies who looked at it as picture languages, here we're looking at 2 Japanese scholars, Yanagisawa and Nagata, who described Kambi Kolams as knot or cycle patterns, utilizing basically unresolved problems in knot theory to understand how many single cycle or knot patterns can exist in a given dot matrix. So if this is the problem, the way they try to resolve that problem is through columns. So what they did was they tried to represent columns as hexadecimal numbers. So if this is the column, for every point of intersection, they decided that it's a 1, and if there is no intersection, that's a 0. So they translated this column into a hexadecimal number based on the ones and zeros. So in the bottom, you can see how 0, 0, 0, 0 looks like, and you can see how F looks like. And they also converted them into constituent parts, and also to give to better aid their understanding of how do you know if something is a Kambi Kolam. They also use linear diagrams, as you can see here. So one of the things that I felt like after going through or reading up on all of these research on Kambi Kolams is that so today computers are very capable of using some of these rules and grammars to generate new Kambi Kolams. So and this kind of was is fascinating. Obviously, you can use algorithms to make these kind of interesting patterns. But then I kind of went back to my grandmother, and I was thinking, but the joy of making columns is kind of lost if a computer can do it, right? So I went back to some other research where we are talking about how do we actually draw columns. So Terry Knight, a scholar from MIT, she also argues that columns are really hard to make by hand compared to making it with an algorithm. You can do that easily with an algorithm, but with hand it's like a really interesting combination of perception and repetition and bodily movement. All of these things are important for someone who wants to make columns. And she talks about using she went and observed Tamil women make columns and saw that they use techniques which are related to something she calls seeing and drawing rules. So if you look at this image, so it's about drawing a line, seeing where the next dot is, and then deciding how the line should go. So she calls this technique taking a line on a walk. And so this is how, according to her, we could use both the computational side, but also the making aspect of column to better understand how to create them. And then even similarly, another scholar called Timothy M. Waring, he also observed similarly. Just one second. So he also observed made similar observations that Tamil women use a variety of hand-drawn gestures to create column designs. So far we've only seen orthogonal and diagonal kind of gestures, but he also includes other kinds of gestures and other stylistic variations to kind of improvise and design new column patterns, Kambi Kolam patterns. Jesus. Yeah. I think I dropped off. I had some problems. Can anyone hear me? Yeah. I don't remember where I dropped off. Lizzie, can you just help me remember? I don't hear you still.
Hello. Hi.
Yeah.
We've just seen the hand-drawn.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Great. So, yes. So, yeah. So until now, we saw both kind of perspectives. We saw the perspective of from the computational perspective and also from the hand-drawn, the human perspective. So here's me trying to figure this all out and combine them. So this is me early attempts to deconstruct a column. I tried to use different color codes and see what kind of elements and how to figure out how they're made. And I tried to make up my own rules in order to reconstruct and create new columns. And you can see me struggle quite a bit here. But then I think I was onto something here, because when I found out about the Japanese scholars and their work, I realized there was some similarities between my deconstruction style and theirs. So according to Shojiro Nagata, they created a method called the N-line method, which is something you saw earlier, which is the linear diagrams. But so how do you make these linear diagrams is that you create a dot array in a pattern of the designer's choice, which is here I chose 5 by 5. you make lines between these dots, ensuring that all the dots connect, but they should not form loops. So there is a rule here which doesn't work. You cannot have a loop that forms a square. It doesn't matter the size, it just shouldn't be a square which forms a loop. And then you make a crossing at a midpoint of each end line. I'll show you how that works. I'll bring up my bring up a video for that. I think I lost my video. 1 second. All right, so you should see it. So you make a midpoint at every cross, and then you start drawing. And this made it so much easier and faster for me to make Kambi Kolams. I can play it again if you want to see how that works. So this is my interpretation of Shojiro Nagata's method. Yeah. So at this point, I was, I started learning how to make columns, Kambi Kolams, right? It was started to become quite an easy task. And then I started having fun with it. I started breaking the grid sizes, and then I started analyzing bigger columns that are more traditional. I'm trying to understand how they use symmetry and all of that. And then I also broke the grid and had fun with different kind of, as you can see here, I was playing around with human body poses, but making columns through that, through the end lines. And then, so before I go to this, a little backdrop that, the bigger size of the column, the more bigger I wanted it to be. And every time I tried to draw end lines myself, I had problems. Like I was, making small mistakes. It's obvious that, that I cannot keep, this is more like a tedious task. It wasn't, the fun part was the drawing the column, right? So I decided maybe I would like to delegate some of the inline method to the computer using an algorithm. And I got some help with this, and I used the depth first search algorithm, which is essentially an algorithm that searches searches within something that has a graph structure or a tree structure. It basically checks if all the lines are connected. It checks if given based on the rules that I have set, it checks that there are no loops formed and so on. Using this, I started creating something called the column templates or column blueprints. So that allowed me to start expanding the size of my columns. So as you can see here, this was what I showed you before, 5 by 5, and this is me drawing a 30 by 30 Kambi Kolam, which is like extremely complex and super fun to make. It can take like 30 minutes or 45 minutes, and it's quite like meditative as well to do this. And then I wanted to test and see, is it just me or can I actually teach this to people? So I decided to take it one step further, create a mini workshop. And this was at the Chaos Communication Camp in August. Yeah. And then I also got some help, and I translated the processing code that you just saw, and we put that into an Arduino with a little receipt printer, and which would generate small 5 by 5 column templates. So it's like this. So you can press and you get a column template, and you can practice as much as you want before you start doing, bigger size Kambi Kolams. And I was successful, and when people started playing and started drawing, they got really into it. Started seeing people's smiles on their faces, which always makes me happy. And now coming to the residency project. So I'm happy that I made all of this progress with my exploration with Kambi Kolam, but there was still something sitting in the back of my head, which was understanding columns not as like deconstructed parts, like how the ceremonies did. Like that was a very like it's mathematical, but it's still very much about putting different components together. Whereas the Japanese scholars saw it from the perspective of knot theory, which was more about thinking about columns as three-dimensional structures. And this is in Wolfram, where Shojiro Nagata was making comparisons between how like existing torus knot structures and how that's similar to a lotus column, for example. And because I have my practices with embroidery and fabrics, in fiber arts, I kind of related that a little bit to herringbone stitch, where it's kind of three-dimensional. The stitches go over and under, and I kind of felt like there was an opportunity for kind of interlacing columns with stitches, and hopefully trying to figure out like a three-dimensional way of understanding column. And I kind of played around a little bit with just a proof of concept. I decided to use the sashiko style of star stitches, and I kind of planned it out on a NIDA cloth, and I made those stitches, and I wove a 3x3 or interlaced a 3x3 column within those star stitches. And what I would like to do for the residency is to combine the column template along with the star stitch column interlacing method, and then maybe also playing with more possibly with e-textiles to think about the intersections probably in more creative ways and so on. So that's my project so far. And I look forward to the residency where I'm happy to see where this goes. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. So I will now add the other speakers to the stage, so we can have some questions from the audience. Let me find. Charlotte, yes, there's Charlotte. Great. Does anyone have any questions from either of these two talks? Then please add into the chat, and we'll make sure we'll try and get through and answer everyone's. I think we have some coming in for Anu's talk. I had a few about Geraldine and Charlotte's, so maybe I'll start off with one if that's okay. So I was curious about how you handled errors in the sequence. Obviously, the Fibonacci sequence is quite, a strict algorithmic pattern. So I was wondering, when you're making, with the physicality of actually transforming this into what you were doing, Geraldine, if you encountered errors, how did you kind of include that in the Fibonacci sequence, or did you encounter any errors, or was it all very kind of straightforward when you were doing it?
If I encountered errors, I was doing a lot of undoing and but if I encountered errors in a on the 127th loop or something, then I would sort of smudge over it in that work. But I also was learning as I went, really, because I've discovered that, when you get to the end of a row, if you're going to do another row underneath, there are two ways of approaching it. You can approach it as a spiral piece, you follow one rule, and if it's a row by row, you follow a beginning and you can follow a beginning and an end rule. So so that it wasn't exactly an error. It was just not quite knowing which way I was going, not quite knowing which was happening until a later stage of the work. So
But it is interesting in relation to what you said, Geraldine. It is interesting because in our conversations, these kind of alternative points became the center of our conversation in relation to different rules that were possible, and then our general understanding of what was happening. So I guess, I don't know if they are errors, but they are definitely kind of pathways that kind of open up possibilities, I guess.
Yeah, I think we have got a good understanding now of the different rules, really, that apply to, because each, a stretched Fibonacci over from 8 to 13 in single rows is very different from the three kings one, which is every second row. And so there are very slight differences in how many loops you'll leave. It'll be, I mean, the rule, there's a sort of general rule that's always there. It's never more than 2. You never add an increased loop after 3. If you go 3 and then add an increased loop, that is an error, and it will throw things out, really. And yes, it's sort of complicated to think your way out of it once you've done that. But yes, it's I think the rules are getting sorted out for it, so that's quite nice.
Yeah, we had one more comment. Someone asked whether it's like a 1D cellular automata in a circle. Would you say that's a comparison that is easily made, or is it a different algorithm, do you think?
I don't know what a 1D cellular automata in a circle is. Perhaps you do, Charlotte.
I was gonna say I'm not familiar with that, so I wouldn't. I'm tempted to say yes, but I mean, I don't know really.
It is. I mean, it is a number of cells in a circle.
Yeah.
If you do it in a circle, or if you do it in a spiral, it's a number of. It is a yeah, it is. It can be viewed as a 1D cellular, as a set of loops in a circle.
Okay, maybe we move on to another question. We've had quite a few come in for Anu as well. So so maybe this was another one, sorry, for Geraldine, saying, getting an increase in a term of art and weaving, does it mean the way the number of loops grows?
For the Fibonacci work, then the increase is basically related to the small increased loop that comes in following an increase is an increased loop. I think I showed in that slide how you put an increase in. And yes, it does mean the number of loops is growing in a row with the increase.
Great. This one came in for Anu. So the net making factory workers who sew the lines to the nets say that if they take the material from the spool in the wrong way, then the nets might curl up when in use. So I wonder how Geraldine is unwinding the wire from the spool. Could it be that the twist in the material also affects the form in the end? So this is for Geraldine.
You have to, if you're working with a 4 meter length, you have to shake it out. I think 4 meters is the limit of what I use. That's long enough. But yeah, you do need to shake it out or wind it through in a particular way. Yes. Otherwise it kinks.
Okay, so this one's for Anuradha. So actual question, are kolams deterministic? I.e., once you start drawing one in a particular direction, is there only one way to fill the rest of the pattern, or can drawers make choices to increase them?
Trying to think if there's other ways to do it, but I think you're right. It's deterministic, and there's only one way to do it. Yeah, the rules are quite clear, and you wouldn't get the same result if you broke those rules.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, how do you see the role of improvisation? Because it seems like it's kind of central to the way that you're doing that, but it's kind of very key to part of the drawing is kind of seeing where your hands take you or things like that. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good question. I think it also maybe goes back to the question that was asked, because I do think there's a role for improvisation based on like the work of the scholar Timothy Waring, who talked about different stylized gestures and not just the regular, like the deterministic gestures that Kolam patterns have. And I think, yeah, there is. I would like to explore those, improvised patterns as well and see where it leads me, because I think that's the kind of advanced column making, class that I need to take. Yeah.
Yeah, someone has said in the chat as well, Phil has said the repertoire gestures hand drawers build their columns out of remind me of jazz musicians learning licks and then building their improvisation pattern. Do you see kind of connection between that?
I don't know enough about jazz musicians, to comment. Sorry.
Okay. Maybe whoever added that comment can add a little bit about how jazz musicians improvisation might be kind of relevant to column drawing. And I'm curious about, so you talk about the kind of history of it as like a feminized practice, right? Like,
Yeah.
do you see, and that you are trying to kind of reconcile that later on as, I mean, this is kind of something that I've seen a lot throughout other talks as well. Is a lot of these repetitive tasks are being seen as kind of feminized throughout history. I was just curious on your thoughts on that, on like how we kind of bring it into a kind of more cultural relevant space as well, and not always seen as like women's work or things like that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, also a very good question. I think digitization has helped a lot in this part, because now there's a lot of other ways in which people practice kolam, not just as like a daily ritual sort of thing, but also as hobbies, also as like we see all kinds of people, not just women, starting to play with kolams, and it's entered into this computational territory as well. So people are also trying to work with kolams using algorithms and so on. So I think I think this is the work we're doing now. I think is how we can, bring more cultural relevance that goes beyond, the feminized aspects. But I also think there is something special about that, just how women connected with each other, and there's something, both can exist. Yeah.
Great. In response to the jazz, so jazz musicians learn standard shapes of sequences or notes and then apply variations of chord and key during the improvisation. I think that's really interesting parallel between the way that you're thinking about improvising around shape and pattern in a similar way.
Okay.
Great. Do we have any more questions in the chat? Am I missing anything? We have one suggestion for a video on Fibonacci.
I see Alex has asked a question.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, following on, maybe, is it problematic if columns get separated from the history?
Yes, I think so. Partly because we need to, because there are some people who like also use columns for I don't know, selling some, some small businesses who use columns to like sell small items. And I think we need to make sure that they have ownership of their own cultural heritage. So as long as we make note of that when we are practicing columns, I think that should be fine. But at the same time, I also don't like columns are really, really old, like pre-textiles, like they're very, very old. Not pre-textiles, but I mean like pre-weaving, pre-crochet, and I don't know exactly what their origins are. And we also see column like practices in Angola in Africa. Like it's fascinating, and at the same time it's very hard to say where these practices came from. So yeah, we do our best.
Great. I have one more question for Charlotte and Geraldine. I hope that's okay. We've still got a few more minutes left. I was just curious as to why specifically you chose the Fibonacci for this, whether there were any kind of mathematical properties of it that made it specifically suitable for this task, or was it more of a case that, this is, the one that everyone knows about? It's quite a famous sequence, so it's quite, I think you mentioned this a little bit in the talk, that people see a lot of the Fibonacci sequence in nature, so you're using that. But I was just wondering whether this kind of technique would work with other sequences as well, or whether the Fibonacci was particularly useful for you.
I just used it because of the seashell connection. Really, I thought it might just help me to create that shape and the form. It was quite simple, really. Just translating those numbers and seeing what happened, putting them into loops in various ways. Can I just ask something? Can I ask it? Yeah. Sure. In your talk, you sort of touched on how to do things. Does it tell you in the article a little bit more of actually how to make one?
So I did talk about how to make one. I don't know if that came through or not, but
if I look at it.
Yeah, the N-line method tells you how to make one, but that's a very, very different way from how columns are traditionally made. So the way people learn how to make columns is usually by copying someone else. So that's just how people learn, especially if you're a young girl. That's just like, or even for me when I was younger, that's how I learned to draw and practice columns. And over the years you might get really good at it and start making your own. But at this point I showed you another method, a computationally inspired method to make your own Kambi Kolams.
Does it, if you follow certain rules, will you do it? You'll be able to do it?
Yeah.
Because I just had a quick try, and it doesn't work.
No. But if you read the rules, you can follow them. Yeah.
You can follow a few rules. Okay.
Yeah. I plan to do a public workshop, hopefully at the residency. So maybe we can, if you're around, we can practice it. Yeah.
Yeah. Be good.
So each one of them, there's only one way of drawing it. Mm-hmm. And I guess, you could do it, this way around and the other way around. Could you?
You can have different starting points. You can rotate it and
But the order of them stays the same for, right.
Okay. Last chance for anyone to get any questions in. I agree with Yvonne's comment that I think a workshop would be amazing. I would love to have a go at this. It seems really interesting. Otherwise, thank you so much to all our speakers today for joining us and for the amazing talks. It's been really, really insightful. Great.
Thanks, Lizzie.
Thank you.
Charlotte.
Take care.
Okay. Bye,